Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today, I'm taking a few more of your questions in a segment of Ask Judy. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. This question is from Jack, who said, for reaction shots, how does that work? Do you get guidance? Do you just stare at the camera until they say cut? Did they film for a specific time and you have to hold that pose? And if that's true, that sounds really hard to me. I ask because you stated reaction shots can be stretched out, so that would imply that you have to hold that reaction shot. So basically, when we're filming, the first thing that will typically be done is what we call the master, which is the big wide shot that encompasses all of the action. And then once that is shot, and that can be used, that's used mostly for the beginning of a scene and sometimes the end of a scene. And occasionally, if maybe somebody else is going to enter, they might go back to that to see someone enter. But it's typically very few scenes will play in a master all the way through the scene. That used to be more common in earlier times, like in the 40s or 50s, in films and things, where it would just be in a wider shot for huge parts of a scene or even an entire scene. But nowadays, particularly with television, and maybe because screens have gotten smaller. At the movies, you were watching a big screen, so people looked bigger and you could see more. But then when they first started with television, screens were so small that to see what was going on, if you stayed in a master, people would be like really tiny. So they wanted to get in closer, perhaps, to really be able to see what was happening. I'm not sure. That's a guess on my part. But so once we have shot the wider action, then they will come in and they will start determining where they need other shots. Do they need close-ups? Do they need what we call over the shoulders, where you see a piece of the person in the foreground, like the camera's here shooting at the person, like you are the person they're shooting, you the camera as I look at you, or the camera's behind where I'm talking and there's a person I'm talking to over there. 2 shots or 3 shots or just smaller segments of what we saw in the master. The master also establishes all of the action, so then once we come in to do closer shots, everything has to match what you did, where you moved, what you picked up, what you interacted with, all those things you then must duplicate in any other shots that you do where the camera has moved in tighter. They might make adjustments where they move people closer together, things like that, to make a scene, to put less air in between 2 people, to tighten up the shot. So things like that would happen. But from there, you're basically still playing the scene. So you just treat it like you did when you were doing the whole scene, because whoever you're talking with will either be over there behind the camera and you'll be looking at them, or pretending to look at them if they can't get where they need to be. And sometimes you'll hear voices from other places, but they want your eye line to stay closer to camera, so they might not want you going, oh, I'm going to look way over here. They might decide to say, well, now, so sometimes if someone can't be there and say the script supervisor is throwing a line, the script supervisor might be like way over there, but you're not going to look at him. You're going to pretend, they're going to say, well, look over here. So you're going to look at some imaginary spot, listen to what's being said, and just play the scene. You know how you feel about what's being said, how you're going to react to it. So it's just reaction shots are done like that. Yes, the uncomfortable ones are sometimes at the end of scenes, particularly if it's going to go into commercial. You will end up with some potentially awkward feeling thing. I remember in the episode The Whirlwind, when the woman comes to tell me that she has this picture of Kurt, and there's a point where she says something and we go to commercial and it just stays on me in my reaction. And the challenging thing is to keep your reaction active. It can feel really awkward, like, well, I should say something or I should do something, but you're a little bit like you have to kind of stay there and you have to find active thoughts as an actor to keep that moment alive so you don't just kind of freeze and go blank. So to find a way to give yourself thoughts like, I don't understand, this doesn't make any sense. How could this be? Did you really just say that? I'm confused. I don't know how to process this. So you give yourself an internal sort of monologue that enables you to kind of stay active in that moment until they finally say cut. So those are where, as I had been talking about at one point about editing, is that if they need to stretch time to make it with a television series the exact number of minutes and seconds they needed for an episode with how the commercials were cut in. So they might say, great, we're going to hang on this for an extra 3 or 5 seconds. But if they don't need that, then they might just have your initial reaction and that'll be it. They're out of there. And sometimes they're fading out and there's all those kinds of things. So that's kind of how reaction shots work. And then you said, are reaction shots taken after the main filming for time filling? No. So it's just part of what you're filming. That was like my close-up at that moment, and so they shot my close-up. When you're on a close-up, you play pretty much the whole scene, and however much of your dialogue or whatever the director feels he's going to need. And usually most of the scene, if not all of the scene, will be played on your close-up, and you will just respond to the scene and everything that you heard and the other characters who were talking and were interacting with you. Or if it was just a scene where you were mostly just listening to what was happening, then you just sit and you hear all of it and you respond to all of it. So it's just part of your close-up. So there's never, inserts will be done separately because that's a separate shot that has to come into a particular position to get a particular item that they want, something, a letter you're holding in your hand or something like that. Or in the case where I said about the whirlwind, where I'm holding the picture that she gave me of Kurt. So that shot would have been shot separately, not as part of my close-up, because you would have seen me holding, you might have seen me holding the photo high enough that it was in frame, but you couldn't see the photo, and I'm not going to hold it like this while I'm looking at it. So then they would at some point bring the camera in specifically, and they might have me bring the picture up into frame, or they might just cut to that shot once it's already up in position where I'm looking at it. Or are they filmed with the rest of the shots for the scene? Yes, wondering because a reaction shot is generally a face shot, so I would assume lighting and sound has to change to support it. Yeah, the lighting has changed for any close-ups or two shots or whatever, because sometimes a reaction shot can be a whole bunch of people responding to something that just happened. And so in that case, they have set the camera, they've changed the lights, they've done whatever. So anytime there's a new shot, they're going to adjust lighting for whatever that needs to be. So that always happens. And then Earl seems like a pretty tough editor, but I have no idea. To me, he really was slicing and dicing up that script, but is that heavy editing? But is that heavy editing or typical and not heavy editing? Yeah, I think it just depends. And sometimes, because we would get a script and then we would get revisions, so you could compare what the scene had been with what was changed or what was just completely deleted. Some scenes were completely deleted. So you could look at those comparisons and say, oh, well, they cut that. And sometimes you might understand why, sometimes you might not understand why. And yeah, depending on how tight the first script was in terms of the story, and did it flow well, and was it already trimmed down to cut out unnecessary things, there might not be as much editing. That might have happened already during the initial writing of it, or before it ever came to us. But if if they were running behind and the scripts came out because department heads had to be able to start preparing, then you might see more edits along the way if then they felt that there were issues, or they had a table read with Michael and Ralph and Will and Ellen and Richard, and then they threw out their thoughts and their requests or concerns or the director had something that he felt was missing or not working in the script. And sometimes those changes would happen and sometimes they wouldn't. So there you go. That is kind of the story on editing and reaction shots. Along the lines of the script question, David Caro said, "So interesting to see the scripts. I would think that as editors review and make cuts, amendments to a script, that over time they come pretty darn close to how the dialogue happens in real life. Real life has those moments of lack of clarity after all. That's how misunderstandings happen. The effluvia of life." Gotta love it. Yeah, that's very true. And I think as the show went along, and writers and Earl and that it all became, they got to know our rhythms. And so most of the time you got the sense that they could write within the voices of the characters. So, but sometimes I'd get scenes and go, that doesn't sound like Mary Ellen. That seems odd to me from everything I had played over the seasons leading up to that. And sometimes, my my opinion didn't matter. Most of the time, my opinion didn't matter, and I just had to deal with what it was and find some reason why. None of us are always consistent in our reactions or how we behave or what we say. I'm sure you know any number of people that sometimes they say something you think, that doesn't seem like that person. Why are they being snippy? They're not usually. Or why are they laughing at that? Or why are they offended by that? So we don't always seem to act in character ourselves in real life. But so I just would have to find a way to motivate it that, for whatever reason, Mary Ellen felt that way and was having that moment. But I think that they did a really good job of creating dialogue that we could make flow like real conversation. And then that is the part of the craft as an actor, is to make whatever you're saying sound like it came from you, as opposed to you are reading lines off of a script. So you never want dialogue to sound like it just came from the typewriter. And some dialogue is easier to do that with. And I think our writers were exceptional. And Earl Hamner was a great editor, script editor and stuff, script consultant. And so they really worked hard to make it seem and sound like real life, in the way that they allowed a certain amount of ad libs, and the way that we could overlap in masters in the long shots and things like that. So kudos to our team, and I'm glad it came off that way to you as viewers. That's what I have for you for this episode of Ask Judy. If you have a question, please do put it in the comments below, and I will either answer it in the comments, or if I have an opportunity, I will pull it and then answer it in one of these Ask Judy segments. So I will see you next time with more behind the scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.